We are good to start.
We're good to start? Okay. We'll just start at 3 sharp. See. Let's start then. Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. Namaskar. Welcome to the 6th iteration of the National Consortium for Multilingual Education India webinar series. In our previous session held on the 25th of June, we had Professor E.N.T. Maria Simply from the University of Cambridge speak on a multilingual approach to English. Drawing on her research in Hyderabad and Assam, she showed how children's home languages can strengthen English medium education, improve reading comprehension, and support critical thinking. Lessons with value for teaching not just English, but any other language, any other regional language or medium instruction. This session sparked this discussion on multilingual pedagogy and teacher training, and we're very grateful for the Professor Simply to give us their time. Building on that momentum, today's webinar turns the spotlight to the larger field of multilingual education in India. The session titled Multilingual Education Landscaping Study, Key Findings and Recommendations. This study was undertaken by the Tata Trusts earlier this year and is one of the first attempts at systematically mapping multilingual education efforts across the country. Drawing from expert consultations, organizational interviews, field visits in 4 states, and extensive desk research, the study offers us a comprehensive view of where we stand as a nation in terms of multilingual education practices and policies. The findings point to several important realities, such as the dominance of early exit transitional models or the lack of effective approaches for mixed language classrooms, and the often narrow framing of multilingual education as being synonymous with tribal education. Alongside these insights, the study also sort of proposes a set of strategic recommendations for strengthening the field, and including implementation design, professional development, material creation, and research. And we have with us 2 key contributors to this study to sort of shed more light and discuss these findings in details. I'd like to take this moment to introduce our 2 panelists for the day. We have with us today Dr. Shailaja Menon, who currently leads early learning and literacy initiatives at Tata Trust. She has taught literacy and children's literature courses at Azim Premji University and the University of Colorado Boulder. Dr. Menon has co-edited several significant volumes, including children's books, and Indian story and early literacy initiative series. She also serves as the editor of the journal Contemporary Education Dialogue and is on the jury of the Hans Christian Andersen Award 2026. We have with Dr. Shailaja Menon, Ms. Akhila Pydah, who works with Tata Trust to support capacity building and grant making for early learning initiatives across India. She has held key roles at the Central Square Foundation, the Early Literacy Initiative at TISS, and the Parag Initiative of Tata Trusts. With deep experience in teacher education, foundational literacy, and children's literature, she has also developed and co-edited several open learning resources on early literacy. Welcome you again, and we look forward to hearing your insights today as I pass the mic on to Akhila to walk us through the findings of the study and the study itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Arnav. Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, Akhila, you are.
Let me just share my screen. It should be visible now.
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arnav and the National Consortium on MLE for this opportunity. Before jumping into our findings and recommendations, what we would like to do is give you a background to why we even set out to do this study and what was the scope and scale of this study, so that you can situate the findings that we share with you in that context. I don't think in this group we need to talk about why MLE. We know that multilingual education is a pressing concern for all of us in the domain. Dr. Dheer Jingran's grave statistic from last 2 decades is staring us in the face still, which is perhaps 1 in 4 children primary school going children are not able to understand what's happening in the classrooms, are not able to learn, face a severe learning disadvantage because they don't understand the language in which they are being taught. So this is the larger, background in which the education team at Tata Trusts felt that we need to have more dedicated strategy for MLE programming. What are the kind of programs we want to support, what is happening currently in the country, what kind of direction do we want to give this within our capacity. So that was the larger background in which we started to do this study. So please keep in mind that it was a very short study. We started in Feb, I think it went on for 2 to 3 months. It's not an exhaustive study. We have been recently informed that UNESCO India will be focusing on MLE as a theme for their status of education report this year. So we are really looking forward to this. I'll tell you what we had in mind. We wanted to get a broad sense of different mother tongue based and multilingual education efforts across the country. So what we didn't end up covering was English language education efforts. And what we didn't do was cover historical efforts in this space. So please keep that in mind while you listen to the trends that we'll share. So we want to look at, when we started out, we wanted to look at the kind of features of the programs that are currently running in the country, which components are they addressing and which ones are they leaving out. So is it curriculum development? Is it material development? Are they doing language mapping? Are they, implementing in the classrooms? What about assessments? What about training of the middle layer, so on and so forth? So we wanted to understand what the overall trends are. And yeah, we used a couple of ways to map the range of MLE programs. We started out with an online consultation of experts in this domain to also get their ideas, but also to get some recommendations on important MLE programs that they think we should consider. So that was an important first step for us. And based on the list of organizations, the recommendations that came our way or the organizations we already knew were working in this space, we had extensive online meetings with each one of them. And we did field visits to select programs. So we went to LLF's program in 3 areas. We went to, those areas were Bastar, Dungarpur, and Jharkhand very briefly. And then we also went to Odisha's MLE program in Keonjhar district, as well as Unnati NGO's program in Akhila, Maharashtra. So we've done field visits in select areas. And of course, we backed it all up with basic desk research on these programs. We looked at evaluation reports. We looked at reports like UNICEF's ROSA report on language and use policies and programs, and some newspaper reports on how these programs were evolving over time. So that was the methodology overall. Before getting into the findings, we would also like to give you a sense of the programs that we covered or that came up during our landscaping study. So this is a list of large-scale MLE projects. Of course, the last one, the Andhra one, since it's discontinued, we consider it as a historical program and we didn't take it into consideration for our trends and findings. But largely, we looked at Odisha's MLE program, LLF's MLE programs in different states. Assam's tribal language medium schools, we have looked at those. And to varying degrees, each one to varying degrees. And also Room to Read India's programs that ran in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. These are the small scale MLE programs that we looked at. So all these are programs where organizations are responding to needs in the schools that they're working with, in the communities they're working with. We call them small scale only because they had, 1 to 40, up to 40 learning centers across 1 or 2 districts. And they worked either within school or outside in the communities. So this is the range of small-scale programs we looked at. We welcome you to share any important MLE programs that we may have missed and that you think are important to consider going forward, so you can put those in the chat box. So I think we will now look at key findings. I request Shailaja to share her screen. Over to you, Shailaja.
You'll have to stop sharing when I
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm just sharing. Just give me a moment. Yes. So, we have written, as Akhila has given this context for this report, the study that we did, we have written an extensive report on it, which we will be happy to share at some point. Today, for the sake of brevity, we have just summarized a few key findings here, and it's not comprehensive coverage. So one of our key findings is that in the field at present, there is no unified understanding of what all comes under the term multilingual education. There's a lot of variability in interpreting what it means, and different programs look at it in different ways. So while in the literature, when we look at what multilingual education means, experts we find often define it as the use of 2 or more languages as a medium of instruction for subjects other than the languages themselves, either simultaneously or sequentially. So we are saying that there are at least more than one language present as a medium of instruction, either simultaneously or sequentially, one after the other. So, and we would expect that these programs result in high levels of multilingualism and preferably multiliteracy as goals at the end of formal schooling. So this is the kind of a vision of multilingual education that experts have put forth. But in reality, when we looked at the programs, we found that there's as I said, a large amount of variability. Some programs were like mother tongue only. So there's only one language, that is the mother tongue. So mother tongue only programs are also thinking of themselves as MLE programs. Then there are programs which are teaching the students L1, but the L1 is not the medium of instruction. It is just being taught as a subject. And L2, which is the regional language usually, is the medium of instruction. This is also being considered as MLE. Then there are programs where the L1 is the medium of instruction and transitions to L2 as the medium of instruction, and so on and so forth. So there are some way L1 and L2 are both media of instruction. So there are all these kinds of interpretations available in the field. Each of these considers themselves to be a form of MLE. The second related point that we found is that in all these models that are there, that I've just sort of described briefly to you, there's a predominance of very early exit transitional models. So I'll explain to you what we mean by that. Again, if you look at the literature as a guide, the literature says that children should be taught in their mother tongue as the medium of instruction, at least until grade 8, and I mean preferably until grade 8 and at least until grade 5. So grade 5 is seen as a minimum exit age to transition the medium of instruction to another language. However, most of the programs that we reviewed were very early exit. By the end of grade 2, many of them were transitioning. Some of them, I think the latest ranging program, some of the later ranging programs went up to grade 3 or grade 4. That would be, I mean, an exception to the rule. Grade 2, grade 3 would be like a common exit point. So the child is transitioned rather quickly to the regional language. And so the policy recommendation of preferably till grade 8 and at least until grade 5 is usually not being met in the field. So we did talk to the people running these programs, and what we found is that it is not a lack of awareness of what is desirable. It is not out of ignorance that these programs are being designed in this way. Practical feasibility, government mandates, pressure, etc., was cited as some of the reasons. So even people with knowledge who are acting with very good intention seem to be constrained in our country in various ways to sort of prioritize early exit programs. And if you look at like what are the aims, I mean, this is like we are just thinking aloud. We are not saying this is a finding, but if you really look at what were the aims of some of these programs, we are looking at from the interviews and our conversations with various people. If you look at why people plan or advise MLE programs, this list of reasons that we have put up on the screen, it could be a mix of these reasons. At the individual level, we feel that when children learn in their language of comfort, their first language, they have cognitive academic benefits as well as socio-emotional benefits. So a child who learns in a language that they understand feels more comfortable, feels more welcome, feels less alienated. These are the socio-emotional benefits, as well as because they understand the language, they're able to learn better and learn more effectively. These are the cognitive academic benefits. But we also value MLE as a strategy in a multilingual, multicultural society because it has certain societal benefits. So when people lose their languages, they lose their linguistic cultural identities. So it impacts identities. Also, when a society has linguistic pluralism, it presumably gives that society certain benefits. It gives access to ways of conceptualizing the world. There's a cultural pluralism. There are cultural knowledge bases that are generated through different languages. In fact, people have sort of Skatnam Tovik Kangas has sort of and various others have said that when you lose linguistic diversity, linguistic pluralism, even the eco-diversity falls in those societies, because we lose indigenous knowledge systems that sort of take care of the local environments. So I'm just giving 4 examples. So there are many societal benefits to maintaining MLE. My intent in giving you this slide is not to sort of give you gyan on the benefits of MLE, as much as to say that the programs that we reviewed seem to be targeting what we have circled in red, which is the individual cognitive, academic, and socio-emotional benefits, as opposed to the bottom layer of societal benefits. Because when you're doing early exit programs, basically what you're saying is, my aim is very modest, it is very minimal. The aim is to make sure that the child who enters the school is somewhat comfortable and is somewhat understanding. And this is what we are realistically able to target in the current context. We are really not able to pursue the deeper aims of MLE, which is, this linguistic identities, pluralism, cultural knowledge systems, maintenance of that, strengthening the multiple languages that are there, and so on. We are not realistically able to target is a broad sense that we came away with. The third finding is that, we found that very often in our country, MLE is equated with tribal language education. So where if you look at the figures on the right, the first figure is of the places where we found the MLE programs running. If you look at the map of India with the blue, that is where the programs that we reviewed were running. And if you look at the figure to the right of that, you will see that these map almost entirely onto the central Indian tribal belt. So this is definitely where the programs area focus is lying, all the programs that we reviewed. And tribal languages are definitely like urgent area of need in our country. So this is as it should be in terms of the fact that we are addressing where MLE is most critical, the most urgently minoritized minority languages are being, and indigenous languages are being targeted. However, we would also like to say that maybe it's not quite as urgent, but equally, I mean, not equally urgent, but also urgent are all the other languages in the country, which are also, I mean, many of them which are non-tribal languages. There are children in schools, for example, children in border areas, displaced groups, nomadic groups. Coastal areas have a lot of multilingual need for MLE. These kinds of areas are at present not being targeted. Perhaps the organizations are working in the areas of absolute urgency, But we would like to point out that there are other kinds of areas where we need to have more effort put into MLE. If Dr. Jingran's statistic of 1 in 4 children is accurate, then it must be more than tribal populations that we need to target. And perhaps it is time for us to begin to think about other kinds of spaces also. And again, a related idea to this, these are all related ideas. Some of these findings are sort of overlapping, is that we have very limited examples or where where a program is running with mixed language classrooms. Most of the time, the language group that is being targeted is homogeneous. In fact, many of the programs will pick areas where 80 to 90% of the population speak a single language. So it is in those kinds of areas that many of these programs are running, and much of our understanding about what works, what doesn't work, strategies, etc., come from homogeneous language classrooms. But we seem to really not have many strategies or ideas or knowledge about mixed language classrooms, and people who work in urban areas as well as various other parts of the country. I'm just saying urban areas, but there are many, many other parts of the country where you walk into a classroom and there are many languages within the same classroom. And I think that what we found is that we are at this moment, we don't seem to be in a position to advise people on what to do in such contexts and classrooms, because we don't have enough programs on the ground. We don't have enough learnings on the ground with mixed language classrooms and strategies that work. If at all there is any work, it would be at an even lower level of, when I'm talking about the modesty of the aims with which we are working, it would be even more modest. It would be to give some minimal comfort to children by allowing them to use some of their language in the classroom. So it would be the lowest level of, objectives that we would have in such classrooms. So that is another finding. A very important finding for us. I mean, all of these are very important findings. Yet another important finding is that we found in the way in which programs, I'm not talking without exceptions. There were exceptions to this, of course. As a trend, we found that programs classify themselves as MLE programs or as FLN programs in the country today. That we need to absolutely shift, because we cannot imagine FLN, well conceptualized FLN classrooms which do not attend to MLE in this kind of a country that we live in, highly multilingual country, nor can we imagine MLE programs without adequate attention to FLN. So basically, when we went and looked at these MLE programs, we found that they have all the drawbacks of FLN classrooms. It is not that they are worse than the average FLN classrooms. They are better than the average FLN classrooms because they have brought in children's languages. They have developed contextualized TLM. So in that sense, they are cut above the average FLN classroom. But many of the problems with average FLN classrooms, for example, lack of emphasis on oral language development, lack of attention to comprehension, lack of attention to writing to communicate, not writing to spell, but writing to communicate ideas or to express ideas, lack of attention to children's literature. I mean, the common complaints that early language and literacy people would have in any classrooms would apply to these MLE programs as well. So, for example, when I say that there's a lack of attention to oral language development, of course, the MLE programs welcome the child's first language into the classroom. But the point is that children don't come in with a fully developed oral language and stay at that level throughout their years. You have to work to sort of develop and improve their vocabulary, their concepts, their comprehension, etc. in this language. And you need sustained and systematic efforts to do that. That lack of planning that we see in the average FLN classroom with regard to these aspects, we found in the MLE programs. And in the classrooms where we visited as well, we would say that there was some, with exceptions, as I'm saying, with exceptions, some did better in certain respects, some did worse in certain respects, but it could be far better. Especially also we found that sometimes another common complaint is that the level at which instruction is happening and the level of the child's understanding is often mismatched in early learning classrooms. And that too we found, where for example, even if you're using multilingual materials and you have innovative TLM, but the innovative TLM is far easier than where the children's actual learning level is, it is not going to help them to move ahead. So those kinds of mismatches and so on, we did find. So we felt that there has to be a close integration between the MLE and FLN practices. And sixth finding is that we found that many of these were primary grade programs. Most of them did not attend to ECC or pre-primary. Now, this creates this real dilemma, because with the government emphasizing the 3 to 6 year age group, what is happening in some places is that children have already gone through 3 years of regional language in ECC, and then they come to grade 1 and they are trying to make it really comfortable for them with their L1 included in these MLE classrooms. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. So we absolutely need to bring ECC into the purview of MLE. Otherwise, children are getting it 3 years too late. And we can understand how this came about, because before that push for pre-primary was there, primary was when many children were entering the system. And therefore, we can understand how historically this programs focused on grade 1 onwards. But in today's context, it no longer makes sense. And there is an urgent need to correct that. Of course, a very notable exception is Odisha's mother tongue-based early childhood program, which they started as a pilot in 2012. And now today they are talking about extending it across 12 tribal districts. And currently it's in 10 tribal languages, and they're talking about expanding it to 8 more. So that is, we feel, a good direction to go in. Also, there is a lack of long-term or in-depth professional development. It is not enough to say that we need to work in MLE. We need to then develop professionals who are able to work competently in MLE. So definitely the teacher education, the pre-service teacher education programs are not touching this at all. The programs that we reviewed, so we found a couple of examples of very short-term courses. For example, SIL has a 2-week course that it is run in collaboration with Guwahati University. Like that, LLF has a 4 to 6 week course that it has developed. So for one, perhaps these 2 and 4 and 6 week courses are not enough. Second is, couple of organizations offering these courses is not enough, given the vast need in our country for these kinds of courses. Also, the audiences, some of these courses target particular kinds of audiences, and we have all kinds of audiences that need courses in MLE. Some just need to be made aware of it and sensitized to it, whereas others need in-depth pedagogical curricular support with it. So we need different kinds of courses and sort of longer term and more in-depth courses. Last point, I think this is the last slide, is that the attempts to make curricular approaches culturally rooted were kind of variable. People felt that just by sort of representing, if the pictures in the textbooks are taken from the children's context, or in some cases we saw that, in Odisha's MLE program, they had this cultural museum where they had a shelf of artifacts from the children's culture stored and sort of displayed, and they felt that that is a way of valuing the culture. But again, we would say that, these are static displays. So even if you collect a bunch of things from somebody's environment and keep it there and ask them, what is this, what is that, etc., these are still limited ways of using people's culture. So it would be far more engaging if, instead of just saying, what is that, while showing them a pot taken from their home and saying, what is this, instead of that, if you could take the children out into the village when somebody was using that pot or making that pot, or have a pot making activity in the classroom, or call a person from the community into the classroom to share these cultural funds of knowledge, that would be a more dynamic, in-depth. And if you could design reading, speaking reading, writing activities around dynamic exchanges between children's culture in the classroom through storytelling, through conversations, etc. That would be perhaps more useful than again turning a culture into a set of comprehension exercises, as in what is this and what is that and all of that. So that dynamic, bringing the cultural knowledge systems dynamically into the classroom is perhaps something that we found lacking. So I will now stop sharing, and Akhila will share the key recommendations, some of which I've alluded to.
Thank you, Shailaja. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So obviously, the recommendations we have made, we draw from the findings that you just heard from Shailaja. And also, given the time that we have, I'll go over them quickly. But perhaps the overarching idea that we had in mind when we were listing these recommendations is the main question that stares all of us in the face is how best do we help children learn in multilingual settings? So all the recommendations that follow are our attempts to piece together different pieces of this, I won't say problem, but challenge. And in fact, trying to even understand what the different contours of the situation are. So that is where we are. Shailaja just spoke about how it's important to focus on minority languages in tribal areas and continue to work in these spaces. But can we look at having more pilots, more full-fledged programs that follow from those pilots in underrepresented contexts? So those could be things like displaced communities, coastal communities. These could be even regional minority groups in certain states, like Marathi-speaking groups in Karnataka, for example. And these could be children of, migratory laborers. So how do we even approach these kind of situations? We have policy documents saying teach children in their mother tongue. But what does that mean? For example, we recently visited an organization called Gubbachi in Bangalore that works with children of laborers from West Bengal, Odisha, Assam, and they were trying to figure out what is the best way to bridge these children. Important to highlight that their goal is to bridge these children to be able to go to state government schools. So how do we do that? And they figured out that it was perhaps Hindi, which was a common link language or familiar language that they could work with. So there are so many different aspects, and there are so many different contexts, so many different linguistic minority groups. How do we understand the situation? How do we understand the organic solutions people have come up with? What's working and what's not? I think it's important to focus on that and pilot some programs in those areas. Shailaja just spoke about the importance of mother tongue based education in early years as well in ECC and integrating them with school based MLE programs. So that's critical, we feel. I think many Anganwadi workers have been told informally to speak to children in their home languages, also because Anganwadi workers are usually drawn from the same community. However, we have not seen systematic planned interventions in this area, and it would be good to know about them, pilot them, design them, see what works. The third recommendation that we feel is quite important, and perhaps it has already come up in different ways, is to support research and knowledge building in priority areas. There's so much we don't know yet, and there are so many things we are trying based on practical constraints. But what is it that works? What has been the student learning over years in these kind of situations? We have some studies of student outcomes from the Odisha MLE study. But we haven't seen more extensive studies after 2011. We haven't seen how the different languages develop. How does the overall performance improve? What about their identities? What about other areas and other objectives that we may want children to have? So we want a lot of research in that. We don't know what bilingual assessment looks like. I saw Dr. Sansokson's comment just now. What would translanguaging look like, practically speaking, in our classrooms? Shailaja also spoke about situations where there may not be one majority home language or tribal language in the classroom. There may be more than one. So what do we do in those settings? How do we prepare our teachers, curriculum, assessment, school system to support learning in this space? Yeah, so that's one. There's so many things we have in the report listed down a list of areas that we would like to support research and knowledge building in. We just spoke about even teacher capacity building for multilingual education, culturally responsive instruction. One is to support teachers who are already in the system. So in service capacity building, how can we strengthen that? Can we have structured courses to support teachers to build this capacity? Can we have courses that do not look at MLE and FLN separately, but see MLE as part of an effective language and literacy program? But more important than that, over long term, can we integrate MLE into pre-service teacher education? So that's also something as a domain we need to work towards. The one thing that we observed in the Odisha MLE program was they could systematically have, they designed recruitment policies, transfer policies, and also they employed local volunteers so that the children's language and the teacher's language had a match in the classrooms. We do not see those kind of very dedicated efforts right now to match these kind of language backgrounds of teachers and children. It's happening in some places, but not happening in many other statewide programs. So what can be done about that? Of course, one is to change your recruitment, adapt your recruitment policies, get more people from the local communities to support teachers in the classroom. But also, can we support teachers to learn children's language, at least to a basic extent, in the shorter term? So these are some ideas that we were toying with. Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges in getting children to learn to read, appreciate reading, engage with literacy is to have access to ample amount and variety of reading material, children's books, and so on. And that's a huge challenge because we know that perhaps market will not support development of these kinds of books in non-dominant languages. So how can we come together to support development, translations of good quality children's literature in this space? We have some very good examples. I think all the organizations that came up in our landscaping survey had themselves developed so many books. I think Suchna NGO had developed around 200 to 300 books in this space. In, I think, Santhali and Kora languages. We have Quest, which has developed bilingual books in Marathi Pauri and Marathi Bhilori. We have Aripan Foundation, which has developed books in Maithili. So I think everyone is trying this, but do we have that, ample corpus of literature in these languages to support children's learning? And last but not the least, as the idea of consortium also suggests, how can we foster long-term partnerships with states, NGO actors, and other donors and funders to support advocacy in this area, and also generate evidence then that helps to get more institutional funding for this important and critical space. So yeah, these are some key recommendations that we had. Again, keeping in mind the question that how do we best support children in these different multilingual settings, and how do we proceed? So yeah, that's it from me. Shailaja, do you want to come in for any closing remarks?
No, I think, Akhila, you've summarized it quite well. And since we are over time, perhaps we should stop to take questions. Aruna, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think it was a like an elaborate way of like sort of presenting the challenges with multilingual education right now in this country, along with sort of some recommendations. Just I was sort of reflecting on the conversation and also from the chat, the sort of the questions and the comments that have come. The sort of the prevalence of these early exit models, as we call them, is not just in India but also like across the global south with and like Carol Benson has sort of mentioned this, and like a lot of other studies have also come out to sort of talk about prevalence of such models in countries of the global south due to the practical and the pragmatic reasonings that you have given, right? So, and also the challenge on when we are sort of doing in the particularly in the global south, when we are sort of working with such programs, we have to engage with languages which have been in historically in the oral domain or which do not have a rich literary so-called literary tradition or so-called written literary tradition in that sense. So within that context of like, yes, the understanding that the limited understanding of like we are constrained with doing it for maybe say 2 or 3 years or at best 4 years. What are sort of the things that you see would be able to provide long-term gains, or like what are the things that are the very high impact things that if those are done within this limited exit, the early exit models, sort of has a higher reaching impact or a longer sustainable impact. Yeah, if you could reflect on that, or if you sort of, if in your conversation with the organization something has come up in their practices, or if they have engaged with such kind of questions.
When you talk about impact, I would ask whether you're talking about individual impact or social impact, because these are two levels of the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of individual impact, of course, I would say that you need to, I mean, which is what most of the programs are targeting. They are on the right track in terms of making children feel that, like their languages, their identities, etc., are valued within the classroom and can be used comfortably to sort of transition into the school language. That is pretty much what the programs are doing, and to that extent it is fine. So but if you're looking at the social impact of it, Professor Ajit Mohanty talks about the vicious cycle of language. So you restrict languages, the functional use of languages, to narrower and narrower and narrower domains, saying that these languages are not fit for academic thinking or literary thinking and so on. So you restrict their functional usage more and more and more. The more you restrict their functional usage, the poorer they get and the weaker they get and the less able they are to be used for more formal interactions. Whereas the more powerful languages gain in power, so the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And Professor Mohanty argues, and actually Professor Ramakant Agnihotri also says that this is a myth in many ways, that these languages do not have rich literary traditions. It's just that they may not have rich written traditions. Some of them have rich written traditions as well. As we know, many languages in the Hindi-speaking, so-called Hindi languages, are older than Hindi, and they have a rich written, oral and written literature in Hindi, and yet Hindi has displaced them, right? I mean, the Khadi Boli has displaced them as the official Hindi. So we know that there are perfectly able languages and empowered languages also being displaced. So it is not a mere displacement of languages that are so-called unfit. And so, these are ethical positions, moral positions. These are not scientific positions or research-based positions. A society has to decide what it is able to do. Everybody will have their opinion, and in a democracy, all we can do is discuss our opinions and come to some shared. This is not derived from research. Cognitive advantages to children can be derived from research, but what kind of a society you wish to fashion will only be arrived at through consensus making. So I would say these programs, eventually the societal impact will be to reduce the power and viability of many languages and to increase the power and viability of a few languages, and that is for us to consider.
Yeah, makes sense, Rex. Also, sort of to jump off from that, your point of like a lot of these languages which are sort of bracketed under Hindi, sort of losing like there's a lot of material which is produced in Hindi which sort of overshadows this material, right? So in terms of like the one of the findings of the study as well, where you saw that like a lot of the programs are focusing on the central Indian belt, the tribal with a lot of significant tribal population, where the difference perhaps between say a dominant language and the tribal language is much more starker, and it's perhaps the need is felt more starkly there. So yeah, but then I was just thinking, like, so then what do we sort of do in situations which are like, for example, there was one in the study, I think, I'm forgetting the name of the organization in particular, but the one that works with Mathili, for instance, right? Yeah, which is again seen as very similar to
Tippana.
Hindi. Yeah, sorry. So in that context, like, where do we sort of see in terms of proposing programs which have been bracketed under this under the larger dominant languages, or what are sort of the pragmatic steps of doing that? Because then again, it's sort of again, as you're saying, it's again comes as a question on consensus building, comes as a question on something else rather. I don't know. I'm just thinking about it. I think Sunisha was also mentioning some reports about Rajasthan and in the chat, and Rajasthan and I think Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, where they were talking about languages which are clubbed under Hindi, and so yeah.
No, I would think that each state will need to open up these discussions about the languages that the state has and which of these languages that they are able to. We should look at the moral, ethical, the cultural, and the pragmatics together in any kind of conversation. So I am not an idealist who says that any state, especially in a country like India, which is under-resourced in education, can simultaneously, where even forget about minoritized languages, even in the dominant languages, we are providing very inadequate instruction and education and teacher preparation. So we are at such a disadvantage. So I'm not trying to say that we should run after pipe dreams. I'm saying we should keep these conversations alive. We should have discussions. We should do priority setting and understand when we do our priority setting, what is the cost benefit analysis that we're doing. We should be aware of what is the cost to some of the decisions we are taking, and then go ahead and take those decisions if you want to. If you say this is what we are able to do, but at least let us articulate the cost to the system in making certain kinds of decisions, and then own those costs and say, yes, this is what we have decided to do as a society. And we understand that this is going to be the outcome of that. We have not articulated this clearly. So I would think that just like Odisha has done, and if you're saying that Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh and all are going to do that, that is wonderful. So if at state level, at regional level, we can have conversations around this, about what it is that the government can and will do with languages in that state, that would be, I would say, a beginning. And I think that NGOs and organizations should support the state in their efforts. It shouldn't be the other way around, that we are NGOs are off doing their own little things without state support. Yeah,
exactly. I'd like to come in here. Even I felt like currently in some states we are approaching it in a very, I don't know which other word to use, but in a schizophrenic manner, where we introduce children's languages in younger grades, but formally it's some other language which is the medium of instruction and assessment. So even in the languages that we do recognize requiring this kind of intervention, we are not yet there. We all recognize that. See the separation.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Just to sort of come back to this question, I guess, but I have a question regarding from Upasana, who sort of talks about AI and EdTech. So sort of asking if there's been any, but like, have you seen in your landscaping study there were prominent uses of AI or EdTech to sort of develop early education material in the mother tongue? Because he's sort of talking about, I think, the cost benefits of it, or the labor cost benefits of it, and looking for your suggestions there.
Yeah, we looked at it very, very briefly. And in fact, that's one area we decided even as a group that we should look more into. And most of those efforts were actually, if Upasana is the Upasana from SIL, So it is SIL's efforts that we looked at, be it Bloom Library and of course Storyweaver, online courses, platforms where you can quickly convert what they call as readers from one language into another, where the format remains the same, but the language can be edited. So those kind of platforms do exist, platforms for accessing children's literature in an open sourced manner, quickly converting from one language to the other. There are also apps for teaching of reading. That's nothing to do with MLE, but just in general. But there's a lot, I think we have to get into a lot more detail into the pedagogy of it and what it does. But as a way of giving access, I think it's a open access I think it's a great opportunity. But we need to see what are the realities in the field. Does it really help? Do we have, the other infrastructure that's needed to support this kind of technology into the classrooms is something we need to discuss further, I think.
Yeah. Also, I think this is sort of reflecting on larger pedagogical principles. Any conversation with tech, and then again, integration of tech into MLE, or the sort of is again a larger reflection on the pedagogical practices. Even the integration of MLE and FLN, as you're saying, we have been saying for a long time that that there is like MLE cannot happen without the changing of language teaching practices in general, or FLN cannot happen without the inclusion of sort of children's own languages. So where do you like you are mentioning that there is a sort of a disconnect in sort of seeing these two things as two disparate strands. Where do you sort of see this coming from, or like what do you sort of understand as this like as a challenge of seeing them together? So what are the press? Yeah.
I think that FLN is a more recent phenomenon. MLE efforts in tribal language education go much longer. The MLE kind of work has a longer historical context. So when MLE work started in this country, people started doing, trying to bring tribal languages in the classroom, trying to work with them and all of that. FLN, the idea that early literacy, I'm not even talking about the N part of it, even the L part of it, to see that literacy, early literacy is an issue we need to focus on, is a far more recent phenomenon. And therefore, the FLN program sort of evolved separately and MLE. So it's due to historical reasons that this disconnect has happened. It is perfectly understandable. But at this point where people are running these large-scale FLN programs, it would be a waste of our imagination and effort if we didn't unify these frameworks, because we should not be running FLN programs that do not have any insight or emphasis on MLE. MLE is part of every FLN program. And unfortunately, we don't know enough to design good FLN programs with strong MLE components. So for example, as Akhila said, if somebody from Gubachi comes to us and says, how do we design a good FLN program in an urban multilingual context? We can, sort of wing it and give some intuitive comments, but we don't really have solid knowledge base on advising these kind of organizations. So we should work towards getting that kind of, where we can respond with integrity and confidence that this might work. Otherwise, we are guessing, we are doing intuitive strategy, this thing. So we don't know enough about MLE to advise strong FLN programs, but that is a key need of the hour, that we generate this knowledge. Yeah.
I agree that there's there's not enough literature available in terms of finding strategies, and also like you mentioning like the homogeneous nature of even when we're doing a lot of these programs, there's a lot of the schools or the classrooms, they are using non-dominant languages, but then most of the students are speaking one dominant language or at max two, which is not the situation of the majority of the classrooms where there are multiple languages and there's research that needs to be happening there. I think there was another question. I'm just getting to that question. Just give me 1 second. So, that's it. Oh, I think yeah. So I think there was one question about the report being public or not. I think it's an internal report as far as we can take. And I think the findings, I mean, the summary of the findings we can sort of share, but not the report itself, as far as I can understand. Yeah. Anything? Ye- yeah, sorry, I got the question. Yeah, so I was also sort of looking at when you sort of, again, for historical reasons, you're sort of talking about how the focus has been on the primary years, and the pre-primary years, the focus has sort of come now and all. In terms of ECC, the situation is even dire in terms of like when students sort of come at that age, and the language gap is even more stark. And so in that case, when we say of like using an MLE model of like having two languages or having three languages, I don't know. I don't. mm, it's a very, again, there's a lot of lack of research there, but from the programs that you sort of read in, like the Orissa program and the Andhra Pradesh MTLEP, project, could you sort of share more insights in terms of what actually was happening in those ECC programs where MLE was being implemented, or the L1 was being introduced as a part of the program?
Arnab, actually, we didn't go and observe Odisha's pre-primary intervention. I think in the districts that Shailaja visited, that was the primary school intervention. But from what I understand, these are mother tongue-based interventions. So they are not proposing to transition or introduce multiple languages. The focus is to help children access learning in their mother tongues. That was the focus, and select districts where I think they know that there is a majority population speaking a certain tribal language. So that was the uh, focus in those. And I think we tend to agree. We are also not saying introduce 2, 3
Yeah,
languages that way, the way we
yeah.
talk about in the Odisha primary school MLE project or other MLE projects. Uh, we are saying at the very least, can children access learning in a language that they understand? At least that. And then perhaps in 5 to 6 year, among 5 to 6 year olds, can we introduce them at least through oral language development? And there are so many ways. It doesn't need to be through introduction of literacy necessarily, but perhaps to ease the transition to the school. And hopefully the school has an MLE program as well. That's why we are saying we have to look at the whole continuum and not just focus on one's age group and not the other. So look at those continuum, and then hopefully children are always accessing learning in a language that they understand while building the others.
Uh, I guess, yeah, in terms of ECC again, yeah, the cognitive load will become too much if there's like a lot of language as well in that sense. I think also like to sort of extend your point and segue into the sort of last question, I think, which is about like accessing learning in languages that they are familiar to, children accessing. So there's, I think, Vedalakshmi had a question of like, how does MLE in primary get sort of impact higher education, especially professional programs or law, accountancy, medical, which again reflects, I think, if we are being hopeful. So if you could like to sort of address that question as we take the last question.
Yeah, can you read out the entire question?
The
Providing
question
access? No.
says, the question is how MLE in pre-primary or primary grades impact higher education, especially professional programs, law, accountancy,
Got
medical,
it.
etc.
Got it. Got it. I mean, if you look at, what the research says, and what I know from like personal biographies in my family from the older generations, which supports what the literature says, which is that if you receive your medium of instruction is your first language until grade 8, there is no difficulty. I mean, there'll be some period of difficulty when the medium of instruction switches to a more dominant language. Definitely, there'll be a year of maybe disorientation, year or two of disorientation, confusion, scrambling, etc. But no long-term impact on higher education or learning. I mean, we know so many people in our generation and in the generations before who received, their primary education in major regional languages. I'm now not talking about minoritized languages, and then switch to Hindi or English or other languages in after 10th grade even, and they have been able to be quite successful. And that's what the research says, that if you have a very stable, solid base in your first language, you develop a certain proficiency in cognitive academic language and the imagination of learning, that you're able to easily transfer those things to another language later on. Whereas if you transition early, the foundations of this ability to think and learn in languages, no matter which language, will remain weak in both language. So that is, I mean, I don't think that should be a problem. It will be a problem if it is not imagined well at the policy level and executed well. It will be a problem. Children will fall through the cracks if we don't imagine it beautifully. I mean, if we don't imagine where the transitions will happen, how it will happen, etc., and expect the kind of support that will be needed during that period of transition. So definitely a lot of policy level imagination has to go into this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we're running short on time. So is there any end note comments from either Akhila and then maybe Shailaja, and then we can draw the presentation towards close?
Now we are looking at consortium like yours and hopefully many more to take these recommendations forward. So yeah, I think that would be my closing comment. There's so much to be done, and welcome groups coming together in this area.
We are just excited that so many people in this country are interested in this topic. We think it's very critical and urgent that we come together and profess our ignorance and our enthusiasm to each other and learn from each other. That is all.
Thank you. I think that's a very good way to note. I think organizations coming together to build consensus to support this, and also like to sort of recognize our pitfalls and our shortcomings in terms of the limitations that we're also working with and how to sort of navigate those challenges ahead. So thank you so much, Shailaja and Akhila, for agreeing to do this and for presenting those recommendations and the challenges that we face with multilingual education in India. And thank you to everybody who has been here throughout and sort of pointing their comments and their questions. I'm so sorry we were not able to get to every question, but thank you so much for putting those questions. I'm sure even if we were not able to address them directly, these were at the back of our mind when we were sort of taking in, consolidating our views, responding to other questions as well. We can also, if you missed it at any point, you can find a recording of this on our YouTube channel and the recording of the previous webinars as well. With that, thank you so much. We will see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.